Hello and welcome to today's live stream, Winning the War on Ransomware. We're going to be live here. We're going to be featuring your questions, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So first of all, my name is Rick Vanover. I'm Senior Director of Product Strategy here at Veeam, and I'm going to be your presenter today. So let's go ahead and get started. I have a small presentation prepared that I'm going to walk through the content with you today. But if you have a question, just drop in and ask, and we've got some team here, some different members of our broader social media and product teams to help us out here. So what is the war on ransomware? Well, it's real. If you haven't seen the news, right, every organization is at risk here. So what I want to do here is kind of lead up to something that I've been working on for a while. At Veeam, my role on the product team is very much focused around Veeam capabilities for this and that. But what I do with my team is also focus on some industry topics. So things like automation, security, cloud native apps, and beyond. My focus on my team is ransomware resiliency. So when I think about being resilient against ransomware, there's a number of tips that I'm going to show out to you today, but I'm leading up to two things. One is VeeamON. So VeeamON is a little different this year, but VeeamON will be a broadcast event in June, and you can attend for free this year. And that's actually a really big deal because we can reach people we weren't able to reach before. And then on top of that, we can also use different speakers at the event that we haven't been able to use before. So I'm working for VeeamON, and I like to call it a side hustle, right? A little separate job here at Veeam where I'm the, lack of a better word, agenda manager for the technical content at the event. Of course, I talk to the various different product teams, marketing teams, and event teams, et cetera. But I really like that extra role that I have here at Veeam. And we're working pretty hard to give a lot of relevant content, and ransomware is going to be one of those topics. So I've got a session coming up at this, and you'll want to join this broadcast. It's free, where I have two users sharing their tips of how they have beat ransomware with Veeam. This is information you just don't want to miss. I've taken in a lot of information about ransomware, talked to a lot of people. The most important thing I think I've ever seen is when the users who have gone through it share their story. So that's great stuff. So let's transition over to my presentation here. We'll go through a number of things briefly. And if you have any questions, you can drop it in and my team will forward those over to me. So for those of you just joining in, welcome. Ransomware is the topic, not necessarily the good side of ransomware, but the awesome side of ransomware, which is how you win. So I have 3 tips that I'm going to go through here. This is the mindset I want you to think about when it comes to keeping your business resilient against ransomware. The number one thing is I think that we have to go into the ransomware battle with a couple of mindsets involved. And what I mean by that is we have to look at it as a multi-pronged approach. And I think that it's really based on kind of a spectrum of time. And it goes through everything you do as an IT pro. And the first thing I think that's very important is education. So when I say education, I'm briefly mentioning this broad step. It's not just, okay, how do I restore from a ransomware problem? That is part of an education because you want to know how you get out of the problem. But you also have to be aware of the threats. In fact, there's a new type of threat that's out there that they have some interesting behaviors. One of the ones that I've seen is around ransomware threats that don't actually encrypt your data per se, right? You think of ransomware encrypting it and you pay, in theory, this ransom to decrypt it. But what these ransomwares are doing is uploading the data, and the ransom is to take it down so that you don't have a unplanned breach or data leak type of thing, right? So a lot of people weren't aware of that, or they find out the hard way. Or if you don't pay the ransom to decrypt, they subsequently will do a leak type of threat. So there's a lot of different threats. So education is important. And I think that anyone who's been through a ransomware incident will agree that education of both users and administrators is important. And I'm going to come back to that here on the next slide. The second phase of the approach, I think that's really important, is around implementing backup and recovery. Everyone I've been to who's been through an incident, they're like, thank goodness I was able to restore via backup. Thank goodness I had a backup. And this is not just a PC problem. This is also a data center problem as well. I talk a lot to the Veeam tech support team. In fact, we've restructured how our support operates to help customers guide through ransomware threats. And one of the observations is they always come back to, where is my recovery angle? What is the type of recovery I need to get out of this problem? And I think that if you have your backup environment implemented well, and I'm going to get to that here in a second, you'll be very prepared to handle the type of threats that come in. These two investments, education and your backup and recovery product, those become basically the engine to guide you through this last phase, which is being able to remediate a threat. And as a mindset, I want to kind of get agreement here with the audience and challenge me if I'm wrong with the Q&A. If you have ransomware in your environment, I believe the only thing you can do is restore data. There's no other option. You don't want to pay the ransom. You don't want to take the damage to your brand of your business. And then more importantly, you don't want to have any conscious loss of data. I think that this is one of those things that becomes a mission statement, becomes a philosophical element, right? Becomes like a guiding principle of how you're going to tackle this threat. If you think about, I think it was Apollo 13, failure is not an option, right? It's that type of mindset. But the only way you can get there, the only way you can be prepared to address these types of threats is to have education on the threats, is to have implemented backup and recovery technologies to prepare you for any type of problem, and then consciously go into a remediation plan. Now, I mentioned earlier there are two different things I'm working on. Like I said, Veeam, but then the other thing, and I've just finished, no joke, yesterday, just finished a 30-page white paper of very specific technical capabilities and implementation types that'll help you in this war, right? So you're going to see more about the ransomware content. We have this website, like a microsite, lack of a better word, where we have all of these ransomware series papers that are available for download. This paper is going to go there. There's going to be more. And the thought is, if you're constantly preparing, you're constantly educating yourself, constantly tuning your backup infrastructure, you're going to be most prepared for addressing the threats that are out there. My goal, again, like I said, we take these specializations. My goal is to always be looking for the next angle, the next threat. I read every article I can about threats. I talk to every user I can who have been through ransomware situations. I've even heard of some very specific ones that actually are attacking SQL Server, and they're changing to use SQL Server native encryption, and the password is not visible until you pay the ransom, right? So these threats are all over the place. I've got some recipes here. I'm going to go through some of them, right? The white paper that I mentioned will have a lot more to it, but I'm going to give you some tools here on this session to help you be resilient against ransomware. So like I said, the topic today is ransomware. We see a number of people joined, so thank you for that. So if you're just tuning in, it's a great time, because the first thing I want to highlight is an educational element. Did you know where ransomware comes in? I don't know if anybody's heard about it, but Coveware has an article, and I have the link down here. In January, they posted a really compelling set of data points of where ransomware comes in. I was floored by this. Over 50% of ransomware threats come in through remote desktop over the internet. That blew me away. That was amazing, right? We've all done RDP over the internet, maybe in the years past, but if you're doing it now, definitely don't do it. First question comes in from Joshua. Oh, good point, Joshua. Where do you see AI playing a part in backup and ransomware mitigation? Yeah, I don't usually like to go down buzzword boulevard, but AI, machine learning are absolutely going to be part of the solution, Joshua. One of the things I've observed, and Veeam's implemented a technology here I wouldn't quite call it AI or machine learning, but interpretation. There's two things that Veeam does actually to help you mitigate some ransomware risk from a detection standpoint, from the backup standpoint. So there's a whole other avenue of detection, right? Things like your network, your endpoint tools, your other types of ways that you can detect. But what Veeam's done is looking for two things. One, if we see a backup with what we call a suspicious increment size, something that's way too big, that's a potential ransomware incident, and we alert on it. Or if we see an environment with very high CPU and sustained write IO, that may be a ransomware behavior as well. So there's two implementations already, in addition to like the computer I'm talking to you on every day, it ejects USB media so that that backup is offline, right? We've got some product implementation through the mix, but I see that, Joshua, as an area that will continually grow over time for sure. Watch that space. But RDP over the internet is by far, I want to say it was 57% of the entry points for ransomware was through RDP. Now, the funny thing is that was over the internet, but I'm working backwards in my recommendations and thinking, well, RDP in general may be one of those type of risk points. So the easy thing to do is put two-factor authentication in for remote desktop access, even for a backup infrastructure that isn't connected to the network, right? And now I view my perspective here on the backup infrastructure, and I was very specific on that because if ransomware gets in, the last place you want it to show up is your backup infrastructure. Because again, back to the mindset, the philosophical approach is that if ransomware is in the environment, the only practical option is to restore the data. So we want to work on that type of mindset. Phishing is the second biggest attack vector. I don't know if everybody knew that. Phish email. In fact, there's a lot of tools that will help you train and assess your risk for that. Did you know about that? GoFish, KnowBe4, tools like that. They will actually send your organization suspicious or phish-like emails, and they will allow you to address on. Are those alerts from Veeam 1, VBR, or both? Actually, both of those are in Veeam 1. So good question, John. The ejecting media, that is a Veeam agent for Windows situation. Good question. And then Simba asks, is the only way to protect from ransomware doing a recovery from a backup? Well, I'm going to get to that in a second, Simba, because I have the recipe on how to get out of that problem. So the third most popular attack vector, by the way, are software vulnerabilities. And what I mean by a software vulnerability is exploited products, like you might think about WannaCry, who was exploiting a patched vulnerability from years ago, right? That was something that if people were doing their updates, they would have been without that type of risk, right? So think about, going back to basics in a way of keeping your systems up to date, automating the patching, being more aggressive with it, et cetera, et cetera. And the same goes downstream from your backup infrastructure back to your production environment as well. But those three are the most frequent attack vectors, right? So if you were to put your efforts from a prevention standpoint anywhere, you'd put them there. But again, you have to mentally be prepared for the risk to come in. So that's where, to Simba's question, I have what I feel to be the recipe to get out of that problem best. And that is to have some form of an ultra resilient backup. Now, I made that term up, okay, but I can explain it. What I mean by an ultra resilient backup is a backup media that will be able to withstand the threat of ransomware. Okay, so I have a whole bunch of ultra resilient and semi ultra resilient backup types on this slide here. And I realize it's an eyesore, but let me explain it. So there are 4 different ways, especially with Veeam, that you can put backup data in what I'm calling an ultra resilient state. The first is tape media, especially when you think about the worm media, write once, read many. These are backup media that, especially when they're removed from the library, they're offline. That's a great way to be resilient against ransomware. The second, and I go back and forth on what is the most, what's the best of these, right? Here's the most modern that I like a lot, is immutable backups. I don't know if you know that, but Amazon, through the object lock capability with compliance mode, Veeam backup and replication can put backup data into these object storage repositories without the ability to delete this data. This is actually great because it also helps you against insider threats, malicious administrators as well. Rotating media have a similar characteristic of tape, that they're offline. And then Cloud Connect with insider protection is a really interesting technique as well. And that's where our service provider community can help you get out of a problem, because they have an out of band copy of your backup data that, if in the event of a complete loss of backup data, you can get that backup data restored very easily via the service provider, but you have to intervene and they have to expose it. So it's a very resilient type. Good question just came in from Len. What about time bomb viruses, right? That's a behavior that is called a dwell within a ransomware strain or a malicious software malware strain that will work through their progression, and they do a lot of things in those times. They'll assess what's going on. They'll identify where the data is, where the risk points are, and maybe go after the most high value targets on your environment. So dwell time is a phenomenon. So my recommendation there, Len, is from an educational standpoint. I recommend having a lot of investment around knowing what the different restore types are. So let's take, for example, I have an image-based backup of a file server. And let's say that that file server is a Windows system that I've backed up with Veeam. And if I restored it, first thing I do with a restore in Lin is I would do the Veeam secure restore, which would rescan that image as it's being restored to make sure there's no known threats from my antivirus or otherwise malware detection software. The other thing I would do is fire that virtual machine up in a data lab or a virtual lab to make sure that if I did the restore, does it reintroduce the threat? And if either one of those two come back with yes, it does reintroduce the threat, I would work down a progression to some other restore types. Example, I would do a file only restore to a new file server. I want the data, I'll put it there, and I may, in the course of doing that, not bring a tainted image with me, if that makes any sense. And that becomes part of the remediation plan. I really recommend that organizations contact support organizations like Veeam support if you're trying to do a restore through something like that, because at least Veeam support for ransomware situations is a very specific check down of, is the backup safe to restore? Some of those things I just mentioned, they have some tricks of their own too. And then when you go to restore, maybe the whole image restore is the right way. Maybe just a file only restore, maybe just a virtual disk restore. That's where the versatility, the flexibility of Veeam can come in and really help you. But if you remember anything from this or any ransomware type of educational content, I recommend having at least one copy on some form of ultra resilient backup storage. So the tape, insider protection, Cloud Connect backups, rotating hard drives which go offline, or immutable backups in the cloud, including some S3 compatible systems, like I believe Zadara just announced support for the Veeam immutable backup storage, right? Some organizations aren't permitted to use Amazon for business reasons, right? So there's a lot of different ways you can go about doing this. And then there's some other semi ultra resilient, like replicated VMs or primary storage snapshots, things like that, you can be giving those extra layers of protection, right? We still want to have backups on disk for performance reasons, right? If you think about, Veeam's always been talking about the 3-2-1 rule, three different copies of your data, 2 different media, one of which being offsite. Throw this into the mix with one of them being ultra resilient, you're going to be in good shape. Now, I mentioned that cloud tier immutability is one of the newer things that we have in our arsenal to be resilient against ransomware. And I want to show you 2 things, 2 different views of how that works. The beautiful thing is that it's one click of a box, but there's some explanation that we need to put with that. So on the left, that's a public AWS bucket. And I've simply said, make these backups immutable for 7 days. So what that means is as I put content into AWS, it will be every single object will be marked immutable for 7 days. And it's important to know that that means every single page in object storage terms. We're used to on-premises backups being relatively large files. Terabytes aren't really a number that you would blink an eye at. We don't just pick up that whole terabyte file and throw it in the cloud. That long story, bad idea. What we actually do through the capacity tier or the cloud tier is actually shell out those what are blocks on premises to be small pages or objects in the cloud. And there's metadata that helps make that very easy for us to manage for send, retrieval, and storage efficiency. That being said, every one of those objects that get put into the object storage bucket would have that tag, lack of a better word, that says immutable for 7 days. And in order to get that, you have to use a technology called the Veeam Scale-Out Backup Repository. I don't like to go, again, down buzzword boulevard, but the Scale-Out Backup Repository is software-defined storage that is hardware agnostic and cloud ready. That's specific for backup storage. So it is a really powerful engine that can help you migrate data around. It can aggregate your backup storage, but it can also take you to the cloud with this immutability. Now, we have plenty of resources out about the Scale-Out Backup Repository, but the thought is that you want to also use the new copy mode, which will immediately take a backup to the cloud after it's written. So the thought is, if you take a backup, today's backup, once it's written on premises, the Scale-Out Backup Repository will immediately throw it up to the cloud. So it's great, and optionally write it as immutable. So you actually have a second copy of the data because you still have it on-prem, but that second copy is now of the backup data is in the cloud and marked as immutable. Really, really powerful technique here. This is currently supported for S3 and S3 compatible. So this is one very modern way that you can help protect against ransomware. So if you have any questions, let's go ahead and drop them in. I had a great set of questions from John, Lenny, Simba, and Josh. And let's see, nothing else came in, but if you have a second to answer those, drop those questions in, go ahead and do it. One thing I'll also highlight is that at VeeamON, we are going to be working hard to bring you some additional ransomware content, including that of 2 different users who have beat ransomware with Veeam. I'm going to give you a small spoiler, but imagine walking in Monday morning to a completely encrypted screen. And this was because the production environment was Hyper-V. And it propagated through an account that had access to everything. So when you think about some of these kind of best practices, separating accounts is another one. Make very distinct effort to not have one account used for everything. So yeah, sure, domain administrator works for everything, but it's an incredible propagation element. And if that account becomes compromised, especially if it goes into your backup storage, it could be a bad day. So my advice here, team, is to take some of these diligence approaches. We've highlighted a few of them. And when we look at our data here, the risk that we don't want to get into is that we know that our data is the lifeblood of our organization. So if you look at your data in your environment, everybody is to some extent digitally transformed with their business, I would hope. And if you put that data at risk with ransomware, the data becomes useless. And we have some real threats that we might need to address. And my goal here is to win the war on ransomware. I want to give you the tools that can help you be successful. So one more question here from Dennis about which of the vendors support object lock are Veeam verified. I changed your question a little bit. So Dennis, I would check A, the user guide and help center, and then B, in the forums, there's a mention to this. And if you aren't getting the answers you want from those two, possibly reach out to your sales team, your systems engineer, they can point you in that direction. But this is a really robust new way to win the war on ransomware. And when you think about some of these tips, ultra resilient backup storage, using different accounts, education, how you implement Veeam, All of these different things are layers of resiliency that, if you think about it as a mathematical equation, they're reducing your risk, right? Every single step you take. So the other thought here is that if you have the time to make your backup implementation more resilient, if you have the time to think through remediation, if you have the time to invest in education, now's the time to do that. The threats are real, more important, and more relevant than ever. And you're going to find more about ransomware at VMon. Again, we've got those 2 user stories that we're going to share. I've got some additional tips that I'm going to prepare, and that will be a free event that you each can join, and I encourage you to do so. Okay, one final question just came in from Roger. Roger asked, what would be the solution to protect against propagation of ransomware into the Veeam server itself? Yeah, before it gets to end users. So Roger, number one recommendation there is to have the backup server, the Veeam backup infrastructure, not connected to the internet. And then secondly, reduce the amount of entry points, like 2-factor authentication would be a good one for the access to the Veeam console. And then another thing is a separate administrative domain completely for the backup infrastructure. Or in fact, our R&D team recommends workgroup configurations with different usernames and passwords for every system. Okay, that's interesting. But on scale, I realize that there'd be some operational challenges with that. So separate authentication framework for one. And then Raj asks, how does Veeam ensure file integrity permissions in the case of a file share on the SAN? Well, it depends on the different, it depends on the SAN engine. And the thought here is that the NAS backup engine is also protecting against ransomware as well. So I think that if you check out some of the blogs we've done on that. All right, so as we wrap up here again, check out VMon, check out ve.am/ransomware series papers. Bug me on Twitter, whatever you need to do. I'm at Rick Vanover. I can take some of these other questions as well. Had a great crowd here today. Really appreciate your time on this live stream. And you're going to want to tune in next week because Monday, Dave Russell, Jason Buffington are going to provide some more industry insights as well. And I think that's going to be at 12 Eastern, 11 Central. We're wanting to bring more varietal type of content here in these live streams. So on behalf of the Veeam social media team, the Veeam marketing and video production teams, as well as the Veeam product strategy team and myself, I want to thank you for attending today. That concludes today's live stream.